Today, we're taking a time-traveling trip back to the 1980s to uncover a lineup of budget-friendly meals that used to grace the dinner tables of countless families. Get ready to see how creative cooks stretch their groceries to the limit with ingredients that won't break the bank. From unexpected flavor combos to clever casserole hacks, we're diving into 10 forgotten dishes that once helped keep kitchen costs low without sacrificing comfort. Number 1. Mac and cheese with hot dog slices. In the 1980s, America boxed macaroni and cheese solidified its status as a budget-friendly staple for families looking to stretch their money further. Baby boomers recalled post-war convenience trends that started in the 1950s, and by the 80s, supermarkets stocked multiple brands of instant macaroni mixes with powdered cheese. Adding sliced hot dogs turned this quick side into a more filling meal, especially for Gen X kids who found hot dogs appealing. Coupons featured in local newspaper inserts often dropped the price of both the macaroni boxes and discounted packs of hot dogs, a boon to parents juggling fluctuating incomes and rising grocery costs. Leftover hot dogs from weekend cookouts found new life in the dish, reflecting a broader tradition dating back to the 1930s. Repurpose every scrap to avoid waste. The creamy, bright orange sauce might not have been gourmet, but it brought a sense of comfort to children rushing home after school to watch afternoon cartoons. Some families sprinkled in peas or tossed in ketchup, though others stuck to the classic salty, cheesy profile. In TV commercials, smiling families described how a single box, combined with a few sliced hot dogs, could fill multiple plates on a limited budget. This thrifty approach bridged old-fashioned penny-pinching customs with modern 20th century convenience culture, all while keeping dinner on the table without much fuss. Over time, more sophisticated versions of macaroni and cheese emerged, but the memory of this neon-colored staple, particularly when beefed up with cheap hot dogs, stands out as a nostalgic slice of 80s cost-conscious cooking. Number 2. Homemade chicken pot pie from leftovers. During the 1980s, frugal homemakers often transformed leftover roasted or boiled chicken into hearty pot pies to avoid tossing perfectly good meat. Inspired by vintage recipes from earlier eras, especially the 1940s when wartime rationing demanded efficient use of every ingredient, these pies used minimal store-bought products like inexpensive pie crusts or refrigerator biscuit dough. Families recognized that a leftover Sunday roast could carry them through the start of a busy week if combined with frozen peas, chopped carrots, onions, and a creamy sauce derived from condensed soup or basic roux. Baby boomers, having grown up in the 1950s and 60s under the guidance of their parents' thrifty habits, understood the value of versatile dishes that disguised repetition. By the 80s, convenience products took center stage, so pot pies might also include a canned vegetable medley to speed up prep. Local newspapers promoted articles on stretching the grocery dollar, often suggesting pot pies as a solution to leftover poultry, turkey, or even small cuts of beef. Gen X children sometimes recalled helping roll out a spare pie crust while waiting for a dial-up phone call or enjoying an evening of VHS tapes. Television ads emphasized quick-fix solutions, often praising ready-made dough as a time saver for families juggling careers and after-school schedules. The result was a warm, savory pie that tasted homemade despite the shortcuts, a testament to how 1980s households blended old-fashioned nostalgia with newfangled shortcuts, all in the name of budget-friendly meal planning. Number 3. Cheap chili with extra beans. Another forgotten budget dish of the 1980s revolved around chili recipes that relied heavily on beans, allowing cooks to use less meat without sacrificing bulk. While hearty chili has deep American roots stretching back to cowboy cooking and Tex-Mex influences, the economic pressures of the 80s encouraged families to include pinto, kidney, or even black beans as a major protein source. Baby boomers who remembered the bean soups of their youth repurposed that idea, blending canned tomatoes, chili powder, onion, and any cheap ground beef they could find, often with a higher fat ratio that cost less per pound. Grocers ran sales on large cans of beans, and local papers featured ads promoting chili night specials. This era's marketing tied into the nostalgia for simple, filling meals reminiscent of earlier times like the 1930s or the post-war 1940s, when families regularly stretched proteins. Gen X kids might recall stirring the pot under supervision, carefully adding chili spices from discount seasoning packets or leftover homemade mixes. Sometimes an old family recipe made an appearance, combining tomato sauce, ketchup, or fresh peppers if they were on sale. Topped with a sprinkle of shredded cheese or a dollop of sour cream, the dish warmed up many a fall or winter evening. Leftovers could be reused for chili dogs, echoing the pragmatic spirit of saving every bite. Throughout the decade, brand-name commercials blasted across TV screens, showing families gathered around steaming bowls. Although chili remains popular, the heavily bean-packed versions are now overshadowed by more gourmet approaches, making these thrifty 80s renditions a reminder of how households found comfort with simple, budget-conscious flavor. Number 4. Pantry pancakes for dinner. While traditionally eaten at breakfast, pancakes made an occasional appearance in the evening for families seeking a low-cost supper. By the 1980s, pre-mixed pancake batters were commonplace on supermarket shelves, and with milk or water required to complete the mix, the total cost remained minimal. Baby boomers familiar with diner culture occasionally replicated the breakfast for dinner concept at home, a trend that the 70s and 80s popularized further. This approach also offered a clever way to use up soon-to-expire eggs or leftover bacon pieces. Gen X youngsters often associated the aroma of pancake batter on a weekday night with a sense of novelty, as if the normal routine had been pleasantly disrupted. To stay on budget, families looked for deals on syrup, sometimes opting for cheaper corn syrup-based versions, while local newspapers might include recipes to make homemade fruit compotes from markdown produce. The synergy between convenience and creativity was evident. Leftover berries were mashed into the batter, or half-open cereal boxes were crushed into pancake toppings for extra flavor without extra cost. Leftover batter could even be stored for the next morning, aligning with a principle passed down from the 1930s that nothing should go to waste. TV segments occasionally showcased celebrity chefs encouraging families to experiment with brunch at dinner time. This unusual yet economical choice kept kids excited about mealtime while ensuring parents didn't break the bank. Although modern cooking trends often favor more balanced meals, the memory of flipping pancakes in the evening remains an emblem of carefree 80s dining, echoing simpler days when quick solutions and cost considerations went hand in hand. Number 5, shepherd's pie with canned veggies. Associated more frequently with British or Irish cooking, shepherd's pie adapted itself seamlessly into thrifty American households during the 1980s. Families often replaced lamb with cheaper ground beef, making it more of a cottage pie variant, but commonly still referred to it by its original name. This dish presented another opportunity to repurpose leftovers, whether a small package of ground meat or a container of mashed potatoes from the previous night's dinner. Baby boomers appreciated the tradition of layering meat at the base, mixing it with onions, carrots, or peas, whatever was available cheaply or leftover, before topping it all with an even layer of potatoes. By the 80s, families frequently relied on canned or frozen veggies to keep mealtime costs predictable. Gen X children might recall the anticipation as the pie baked, a slightly crisp golden crust of mashed potato forming on top. Leftover gravy packets or bouillon could be mixed into the meat to add flavor without the cost of extra fresh ingredients. Stores often sold off-brand versions of these pantry staples at reduced prices, making a big difference to those with limited funds. Some households added grated cheese on top if their budgets allowed, creating a gooey layer that further piqued interest. Old commercials might highlight the convenience of instant mashed potatoes for quick assembly, tapping into the long-standing American notion, originating from the 1930s or even earlier, that mixing thrift with hearty comfort was a respectable strategy. The end result embodied the 80s ethos of minimal waste and maximum satisfaction, a self-contained meal that could feed a family and heat up easily for lunch the next day. Number 6. Chicken divan with condensed soup. Chicken divan had been around since at least the mid-20th century, but in the 1980s it found renewed life as an economical dinner that dressed up leftover chicken. The recipe typically featured florets of broccoli, chunks of cooked chicken, and a sauce made from condensed cream soup, often cream of chicken or cream of mushroom, thinned with milk. Baby boomers recalled how their parents had adopted condensed soups in the 1950s and 60s as a shortcut in casseroles. By the time Gen X was coming of age, the inclusion of processed cheese or a sprinkle of breadcrumbs was routine, adding a comforting yet budget-friendly twist. Grocery stores often ran promotions on soup cans, and combined with sale broccoli, families could assemble a decent meal without splurging. Some variations included a splash of lemon juice or a dash of curry powder, reflecting the period's growing curiosity about international flavors. However, the majority stayed close to the mild taste that children would reliably accept. In certain households, everything was baked in a Pyrex dish until the top bubbled into a golden hue. Meanwhile, magazines and local newspapers might dedicate columns to these one-dish wonders, praising their low cost and minimal cleanup. Television commercials often starred bright, smiling actors tossing leftover chicken and a can of soup into a casserole dish, emphasizing quick results for working parents. Although fresh cooking methods took off in later years, especially in the 1990s, chicken divan remains a testament to how the 1980s embraced convenience, nostalgia, and affordability in a single casserole pan. Number 7. Fried Bologna sandwiches. This simple meal, sometimes referred to as the poor man's steak, had hovered in American kitchens for decades, but it remained a top choice in certain 1980s households that needed to watch every penny. Pre-sliced bologna was one of the cheapest deli meats at the time, frequently offered in large family packs. Baby boomers who grew up on white bread lunches in the 50s and 60s carried that tradition forward, though the new twist involved quickly frying the bologna in a skillet until it blistered and curled at the edges. Gen X children found the sizzling process entertaining, watching the meat puff in the pan. Often, a slice of American cheese was slapped on top, and the sandwich was assembled on basic white bread with mustard or mayonnaise. Despite the simplicity, the flavors appealed to many, especially when served alongside a handful of store-brand potato chips. Advertisements for bologna occasionally appeared in newspapers or on local TV channels, promoting lunchtime favorites, at a fraction of the cost of more premium lunch meats. Some families experimented by adding lettuce, tomato, or pickles if the budget allowed, while others stuck to the minimalist version that reminded them of older, Depression-era traditions, where cheap cuts were the norm. The fried bologna sandwich showcased how people in the 1980s continued to look back on thrifty solutions from the 20th century's leaner periods, blending a sense of nostalgia with a practical way to feed children and adults at a low cost. By the turn of the decade, interest in more health-conscious items grew, but this humble sandwich lingers as a symbol of cost-effectiveness and unpretentious flavor. Number 8. Budget-baked potato bar. The idea of a DIY potato bar gained traction in the 1980s, particularly for large families and social gatherings, thanks to the low cost of russet potatoes and the endless possibilities for toppings. Many households knew that potatoes stored well and stayed budget-friendly year-round, drawing on a technique that stretched back to the 1930s when root vegetables played a central role in avoiding food waste. In the 80s, baby boomers, now busy parents, would bake a batch of potatoes in the oven or microwave, then let each family member customize their own with a range of cheap toppings: shredded cheese, bacon bits, butter, sour cream, and diced chives if available. Gen X kids enjoyed the autonomy of choosing what went on their spuds, which also helped distract them from noticing that the overall meal cost remained minimal. Grocery stores marketed large bags of potatoes at discounted prices, while the suggested toppings might include leftover chili, canned vegetables, or whatever was on special that week. Occasionally, older relatives recalled the older English tradition of jacket potatoes, but the American spin was to load it with extras like processed cheese sauce or ranch dressing. Advertisements for microwaves during the 80s helped popularize the notion that a baked potato could be ready in minutes, aligning with the era's push for convenience. While modern culinary trends might tout more elaborate stuffed potatoes using gourmet cheeses or fresh herbs, the 1980s budget-baked potato bar was all about maximizing value and turning a single inexpensive ingredient into a filling family meal. Number 9, JellO salad with mixed fruits. Colorful gelatin salads never disappeared entirely after their mid-century heyday, but in the 1980s they still served as an affordable dessert or side dish for potlucks. Families found that boxes of flavored gelatin were often on sale, making it easy to prepare large bowls of jiggly treats at a minimal cost. Baby boomers, who might remember the elaborate JellO molds from 1950s dinner parties, toned down the practice for the budget-minded 80s. The modern twist involved throwing in mixed fruits, like canned mandarin, oranges, pineapple tidbits, or fruit cocktail, items that might be lying in the pantry due to sales or coupon deals. Gen X children frequently saw these salads at community gatherings, a bright splash of color among casseroles and bread rolls. Some variations included a dollop of Cool Whip or cream cheese folded in, turning it into a fluffier concoction. Local recipe columns occasionally printed tips on how to best layer ingredients or incorporate miniature marshmallows, capturing the era's fascination with sugary side dishes that could double as dessert. This phenomenon was partly fueled by brand-led marketing campaigns that portrayed gelatin as both whimsical and family-friendly. While newer generations might cringe at the idea of fruit suspended in quivering gelatin, it stood as a sign of thrift and creativity. Produce didn't have to be fresh if you could incorporate canned or discounted fruit into a visually appealing dish. In a world before the organic craze took hold, this approach symbolized the 1980s effort to stretch the grocery budget and entertain children's imaginations with a single box of cheap gelatin. Number 10, instant mashed potato surprise. Although instant mashed potatoes surfaced in American stores earlier, the 1980s saw more households adopting them for quick, low-cost meals. Baby boomers who had grown up peeling real potatoes in the 1950s and 60s might have been skeptical at first, but busy schedules and frequent coupons enticed families to experiment with dehydrated flakes. The surprise element typically came from incorporating bits of leftover meat, such as diced ham, chicken, or even Spam, and sometimes blending in reconstituted cream soups or cheese powder. This practice mirrored older ration-era values from the 1930s, when cooks creatively reworked scraps into palatable fare. Gen X kids often appreciated the convenience. A quick boil of water or milk, a stir of the flakes, and dinner was well on its way. Marketers reminded consumers that with a single box of instant potatoes, a large portion could be produced in just minutes, freeing up time for other tasks. Local newspapers contained articles on smart leftover strategies, and many included some variation of mashed potato casserole or surprise bake. By layering leftover vegetables, sprinkling a bit of cheese, and browning the top under the broiler, a humble pouch of dehydrated spuds became a legitimate family meal. Although modern palates often prefer real, rustic mashed potatoes, the 1980s version, in which no convenience was too small to consider, highlights how budget consciousness overshadowed the desire for fresh produce. The popularity of these instant mixes remains a testament to an era when speed, savings, and simplicity counted for more than culinary refinement, culminating in a dinner table that was at once practical and reminiscent of older, thrifty traditions.